All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. And thank you for joining us. I'm JP Dule, Community Impact Coordinator and Certified Trainer at Positive Coaching Alliance, and I'm going to be your moderator today. PCA is honored to host this important conversation exploring AAPI engagement in sports, from the challenges faced to wins that were earned and what it'll take to shape a more inclusive future. Today's discussion builds on PCA's ongoing commitment to advancing equity and inclusion in youth sports and in recognition of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. We're shining a light on the lived experiences, leadership, and resilience of AAPI athletes, coaches, and advocates. Together, we'll explore how identity, culture, and community shape the AAPI experience in sports, from navigating representation gaps to breaking barriers and fostering a sense of belonging. We'll also examine the roles of mentorship, inclusive leadership, and mental wellness in building a future where every child feels seen, supported, and inspired to thrive. So thank you again for being here as we amplify AAPI voices and uncover the insights and tools needed to drive meaningful change in youth sports. But before we begin, I'm honored to introduce our panelists, each of whom brings a rich perspective grounded in leadership, cultural identity, and a deep commitment to equity in sports. So just to make sure I have my profiles correct here, I'm going to try to read this to you as best I can. So first, we have Coach Marshall Cho. Marshall is a Korean American coach, educator, and community builder whose work spans the US, Africa, and beyond. He's the founder of Coach Cho Basketball and currently serves as the head coach at Lake Oswego High School in Oregon. Must be beautiful over there. His career has included coaching future NBA players, mentoring youth through global initiatives like Basketball Without Borders, and leading equity efforts with organizations including the Council of Korean Americans and USA Basketball. Welcome, Marshall.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So next, we're joined by Dr. Alicia Tran. Hi, Alicia. Alicia is an associate professor at Arizona State University and head of the Tran Ethnic and Minority Psychology and Experiences, or TEMPE Lab. Her research focuses on the intersection of racial and ethnic identity, athlete mental health, and social belonging. She served as a national advisor to the NCAA and contributed thought leadership to organizations like the Adidas Corporation and the ASU Global Sport Institute. Welcome again, Alicia.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here.
We're honored to have you. And we're also joined by Coach JJ Juan. JJ is a Filipino American coach, educator, and mentor with over 25 years of experience developing student athletes on and off the court. A proud New Orleans native, he has led his volleyball teams to over 800 career wins and 6 state championships. As a head coach, athletic director, and science educator, JJ is known for building environments rooted in discipline, confidence, and holistic growth. He currently serves as head volleyball coach and teacher at the Academy of the Sacred Heart. Welcome, JJ. All right. And
Hey, I'm excited. Thank you for having me.
awesome. And our fourth panelist is Tiffany Fong. Tiffany is a health and wellness educator and director of athletics at the San Francisco School, where she spent 17 years cultivating inclusive youth sports programs. A former collegiate basketball player and a current NCAA women's basketball official, Tiffany brings a multifaceted perspective that bridges her experiences as an athlete, a game official, and a leader. And her work centers on equity, representation, and empowering the next generation of women and AAPI athletes. Welcome, Tiffany.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have all of you here. And just in respect everyone's time, I'm going to jump right into it. So the first question is for all four of you, actually. Uh, what does it mean to you personally and professionally to be part of the AAPI community in sports? What does it mean to you personally and professionally to be part of the AAPI community in sports? Um, Alicia, why don't we start with you?
Okay. I appreciate that question so much because I identify as an Asian American woman research scientist, and any one of those things are usually not the first image that you think of when you think of sport, and I own that. But being a researcher of sport and mental health is so significant to me because this is my life's opportunity to be exceptional, not an exception. And I feel I have a specialized skill set as a mental health researcher that can help serve and advocate for the AAPI community. And I carry that torch proudly. And so that's professionally. Personally, I have children. I was just talking about having little boys in Little League and hopefully a daughter who will also choose her sports. Uh, Doing this work related to sport means that I am making a commitment to promoting AAPI health and my family's health, as well as promoting their participation in activity that has life-saving qualities like community, camaraderie, social networks, and positive sense of regard for oneself. And so this means a whole lot to me professionally, personally, and being a member of the AAPI community.
Thanks, Alicia. Anyone want to jump in? I can always pick someone.
I'll jump in before getting picked. There's a line that Dr. Tran said that was really powerful to me, that you can be exceptional and not the exception. So I've been in the basketball coaching space for about 20 years, but immigrated from South Korea when I was 10 years old, to Springfield, Oregon, on the West Coast, but still not a lot of, Asian Americans around, that we grew up with. So definitely felt like the exception oftentimes. So what I find myself, just as an Asian American coach, um, tell and coming from more, having been born and raised in South Korea, where it's a collectivist society, like I find it more natural for me to be able to say as a coach, you're always a part of something bigger than you. And so if I'm giving that message, let's say I was a high school coach and I'm always, I'm telling my high school guys that you're a part of all the youth kids that look up to you, and you're a part of that village. I think that's something that comes to me naturally just from my desire to be a part of something, right? And then just having been in the space long enough where, I've had so many young coaches reach out to me and say that my journey has been an inspiration for them, and that to see me succeed or trying to be exceptional on the highest stage is a motivation for them. Dr. Chan, I think I'm going to steal that line a lot, moving forward, but there's also a lot of pressure for us to excel academically and, other places. So, I know that's a, double-edged sword, but I think that's all part of, our journey, and excited to just share the rest of our experiences here for the next hour.
And I feel that Coach Cho, said it well too. And it feels like we're just going to piggyback off each other in today's talk because of our just shared connection and experiences. But of course, yes, to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself, that's the athlete mindset in what we are trying to do with, I would say, education in sports, what we hope that young people get from their sporting experiences. And yes, there are these pressures, right? And that's the line that is prevalent, in that pressure is a privilege, and that there are expectations of you. And that's part of the mental health piece that I think Dr. Tran is also kind of working through and thinking through. And for me, as a representative growing up in the South and then moving out to the West Coast, I felt like I've had lived experiences in different regions and different places where there was acceptance and where there was rejection, and to kind of go through that, to share that with the younger folks who are seeing us in these positions that maybe they would never have even imagined. Because I know that I did not see them often, and that means something to me. Being this representative in a space that is not Asian dominated, or has just these freckles, if you will, of us in it. I know my role and I accept it wholeheartedly. And I want to continue to show young people what is it that we can do that's beyond possibly their just vision of what they see of themselves.
I mean, when you when you look at it, I mean, growing up as a youngster, I follow every prototypical standard science teacher type mentality. And, in the early part of the career, when you walk into a gym, the first thing the referee is going to go is a coach here yet? You're the moderator, right? No, I'm it. And so that's standard and typical in anything. Well, I thought you were the science teacher. Well, I am that too, but I am the volleyball coach. So, you blow the whistle and here's a lineup card. Done, let's go. But that's what, I mean, I feel, I don't know about y'all, but that's every part of everything, walking into anything. So to represent that, you represent myself, plus you represent the people right behind you. I don't have an accent. I, I speak perfect, and you work it from there, you know. But for me, it's an honor and privilege to do something like this because, again, you don't see that many of us out there. I mean, especially in the South.
Thanks, everyone. And each of you obviously share unique perspectives, but Tiffany, I like how you brought up that we're kind of going to piggyback, or in other words, we share similar experiences in a way. And JJ, I love the story about how people didn't expect you to be the coach, basically, right? You're the science teacher, not the coach. I think that's something that many of us kind of understand, or that where people will do that to you. And we'll dig deeper into these things. In fact, do you all mind if I go on to the next question? Okay. Okay, so the next question is actually for you, Marshall. Marshall, your journey spans from Harlem to Mozambique to Oregon. How have these diverse cultural experiences shaped your understanding of representation and identity in sports? And everyone, if you need me to repeat the question, because I know there are a lot of long words in these questions. I'm being funny, but yeah, if you need me to repeat the question, please do. Let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was previewing a little bit earlier, like the coming back to Oregon part was really coming back home. So, I was born and raised in South Korea, immigrated when I was 10 years old, grew up in school where my brother, my siblings, and I were the only Korean Americans in our school, right? So, you go through that experience, and then, I graduated from college in 2000. I got placed into teaching seventh grade math in the South Bronx through the Teach for America program. And as I was doing that, I wanted to be really intentional about, committing to a community that I was living in. So I found a place to live on 118th and Lenox in Central Harlem. So in both those cases, when I went through college, I found a lot of Asian American friends and I found more diversity. But the experience of first moving into the block on 118th Street in year 2000, just as gentrification is about to take off and a lot of the long-term residents are feeling threatened about their security in their home. And it literally took me back to 1986, some 24 years, let me do the math here. I used to be a math teacher 14 years earlier, where I was a immigrant, same thing, being the only Korean anywhere, right? And the acceptance that I had as an immigrant in 86 was, because I was really good at soccer, because soccer's the main sport in Korea, I found acceptance right away. In a similar sense, when the people in the Harlem community in my block found out I was an educator and committed to being an inner city educator at that acceptance was immediate. And there was some comfort in that I look back and go, wow, like I was blessed to have that. you know. And then you stretch that comfort zone even more. I met my wife at the local church in Harlem. She's also Korean American like myself, but she had moved to Mozambique. So I followed her out there. And now I'm in southeast, eastern part of Africa, a former Portuguese colony. I don't speak the language. So again, it's all over again where I have to find connection in different manners. Whether it's just through a game, shooting hoops and, picking up phrases here and there. But in all those instances where if you are truly like the one person representing your whole culture, like that kind of ambassadorship and responsibility, it could be daunting, but it also gives you a chance to connect right away and just be seen as that your whole person and get to remove some of those barriers or stereotypes that people may have of you. So, in that sense, I don't know how many in the audience had similar experience, but it gave me a sense of um, assimilating, like sink or swim, that whole deal. But in each of those cases, it was comforting to know how quickly I was accepted, and then it challenged me to learn more about the local community as much as possible.
Great. Thanks, Marshall. It sounds like it was really important. Not important, but it sounds like people saw your value beyond what they saw in front of them. As soon as you showed that you were an educator and you were an inner city educator. That's really cool that people saw that value that you had. Um, and I like how you brought up ambassadorship, that sometimes we do, whether or not we choose to, right? It's kind of like what Charles Barkley said a long time ago, right? Like, am I a role model? I don't, I'm not a role model. It's like you don't choose to do that, right? Sometimes you're the one that people look at. And so sometimes I don't choose to be a role model, but I am, regardless. Thank you. So we'll follow up on more, Marshall. But thank you. So my next question then is for Alicia. Uh, so Alicia, your research focuses on minority athletes and their mental health. What are some specific mental health challenges today that AAPI athletes face, at least based on your research? What have you found in terms of what they face with mental health challenges, especially challenges that are often overlooked or not recognized?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. And I'm gonna start out pretty heavy here because this is one I really don't want to be overlooked. But Asian American youth and athletes at that, and that's what I've seen in my research too, are at high risk for suicide. Suicide is a top leading cause of death for Asian youth, 15 to years old, and it's stubbornly resistant to change. And so it persistently has been a top leading cause of death. At the same time, Asian Americans are less likely than many other racial ethnic groups to receive mental health care treatment. And so what we're seeing is that mental health can go under the radar with AAPI youth. And it's very easy to miss. And so on top of all of this, they also face things like racism, stereotyping, bullying, teasing, and especially the type of teasing that can be passed off as I was just kidding, I was just joking, or being too sensitive. We label these microaggressions. And so that can be another layer of very stressful experiences that can negatively impact Asian Americans' mental health. And on top of that, there was some mention earlier when we were talking about pressures to fit this model minority image or mold of being academically excellent or occupationally excellent for older populations. But so we see this big just pressure pot here of you're supposed to be academically excellent, you're supposed to be occupationally excellent, you're supposed to be socially excellent, and then you also have to be athletically excellent. And so if you can imagine, all of this comes with great mental health risk. And I don't know an athlete out there who doesn't think about somebody else that they must have disappointed when they lose. And so you can imagine the pressure that they must be feeling with all of these expectations, plus their own that they put on themselves, whether it's because they don't want to disappoint themselves, their families, their friends, their teachers, their coaches, their teammates, whatever. And so there's some great mental health need, and sometimes that can culminate in something like suicidality. At the same time, we see fantastic diversity among Asian Americans. We've got this great group here. I'm Vietnamese American. I heard that Coach Cho identifies as Korean. We've also got some Filipino identification, things like that. And so that's great. And I want to celebrate that. I also want to acknowledge that with that diversity, there are different levels of risk for different groups. And so, for instance, we tend to see more mental health concerns in those groups that don't tend to fit that model minority stereotype, like Vietnamese Americans like myself or Filipino Americans. And so today, I'm so honored to be talking about positive coaching because I want to emphasize that something we all know, okay, that caring adults are key to youth development in coping and resilience. And that's who coaches are. They're those positive adults, those positive figures who stick with you in your life. I think of Coach Fong mentioned that Coach JJ was her coach, and that's fantastic. They stay with you for life. And so I think that there's a misconception that coaches aren't interested in mental health at all. They care about is performance, and they're not interested in mental health. I have talked to many coaches, and I would say that that is absolutely not the case in 100% of the conversations that I've had with coaches. I'm sure there are some who might be the exception to that. But my understanding from many coaches is that they value mental health, Asian American, Pacific Islander mental health very much, but they don't know what to do. And so when I'm here and I want to say what's a message to coaches, when I say that it's important for coaches to help support the mental health of young athletes, I want to emphasize that I'm asking you to help and not solve the problem. And hopefully that's relieving and empowering to you, that it's not all on you. And so some of it may be if you can help them get to somebody who can help with these mental health concerns. But please don't hear that and do nothing. Okay, because there are things you can do. There are steps you can do, like take a training, learn that 988 is the number for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Have those conversations you normally have with your athletes. Like, hey, did you call that number? Okay, all right, well, you having it? You can text them too, All right, I'm going to check in with you next week. Just like you get on them about all their other stuff, remembering this or that, a piece of equipment, or remembering this or that about practice. And another thing, a really easy thing that you can do is let a mental health advocate come and talk to your students at practice. So many people, if you just put the message out, the call out, somebody will step up and ask to do that. And I think that those are really important things that can help it so that AAPI concerns aren't overlooked.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. I actually do want to ask a couple of small follow-up questions, mostly because I'm a research psychologist myself. And I've a couple things for you. So one, in your studies, whether it's your own empirical research or things that you've reviewed, what are the age groups that are there differences in age group in terms of their risk? Is it younger kids, older kids?
It does tend to be that adolescent to young adult group that there's a lot of risk, but that said, there's risk throughout and into adulthood, especially. And so it does tend to be the younger adolescents and young adults that we really, really want to watch out for. And they're at heightened risk for things like suicide, but also things like depression. Adults, especially to the Asian American community, there's a lot of risk for unmet mental health needs. And so a lot of it can be something like waiting, and trying to take care of it yourself, or trying to, suffer in silence, try and tough it out, that kind of stuff, until it gets to a boiling point. And that's why I suspect we see something like it culminating in suicide. And so let's not get to that point. Let's walk it back and make sure that we don't get to that extreme or serious level. With younger people, the symptoms of burnout in sport, they tend to increase at that early stage of adolescence into, adulthood. We tend to see kids drop out of sports in the early teens, like 13, 14 years old. And the reason why I bring up burnout is because a lot of the symptoms of burnout look a lot like mental health needs. So things like depression and anxiety, withdrawal. And so there's this situation here where there may be risk for dropping out of sport, which is I think, life-saving and can be positively impactful to mental health and can help us, lean in and be with people at the same time that we're facing risk from mental health concerns getting really heightened and at risk during that developmental period of adolescence and adulthood. So this question is hugely important that you're asking.
JP, if I can also,
Yeah,
I love obviously hearing what Dr. Tran is saying in the sense of just awareness and getting that kind of getting this message out there. And I would say like possibly for not only the coaches or the parents that are watching and observing. I feel that in that adolescence, there's so much of this identity building. And when they're building that identity, they're trying to figure out what phases are them, right? Whether I'm a soccer player, I'm a volleyball player, I'm a basketball player, or maybe I'm not, but I just wanted to try it. And what's wrong with trying it? What's wrong with having them try on these different identities and seeing what is it that they have joy with? And the burnout is real, and I want to make sure that the parents are aware, as much as you may want your child to succeed in these various sports. Who doesn't want our children to succeed? We all want them to. And we also know that failure is learning, and that's a part of life. And I hope that we start to reframe that that's a part of the process as well. And if we take away one of the pieces of that process, what are we really doing for our children and the overall makeup of how we want them to grow and be as strong, thriving adults? And I would say that in essence, to the burnout, it is like you have to let them lead. You have to let them say, this is what I want to do, and really be the listener. The great Pat Summit was just an amazing advocator of this. And she did it with her own son, Tyler, in the sense that he is the engine. We will buy the gas, we will buy the insurance, we will give you the driving lessons, but you are the engine that drives us. And I think that that was meaningful for me, not only obviously as a coach, but even just as a parent. As much as we may want to do these things and have these things for our children, do they want it? And I think it's really our position to just listen and support them, and of course, provide them with the resources as best as we can to help them grow.
I'm a big advocate, Coach Ryan. Thank you so much for saying that, of keeping sports fun. And that's the big thing to keeping youth athletes and also adults, right? Like if it's not fun, we don't want to do it. And so that's the only way we keep getting the life-saving benefits of sports is if we stay in it. And so that's such an important point you're making. Let's keep it fun, and keep them motivated and remembering why they got into this.
Tiffany, thanks for chiming in. And in fact, I should have mentioned that earlier, that even though I direct a question at one particular person, all of you feel free to jump in at any time. But yeah, I mean, let's just say that you're in the right place. You're in the right space here with Positive Coaching Alliance. We talk about how when sports is done right, it can change lives in a positive way. But the key part of that is doing it right. And it sounds like we're all kind of sensing that. It doesn't always get expressed, or a lot of us don't want to face that sports aren't being done right. So Alicia, it sounds like your work is going to help pave that way towards doing sports right.
I really hope so.
Yeah, and it'll take time, I think. Can we move on to the next question, or JJ or Marshall, did you want to chime in real quick? Otherwise, I'll move on to the next. Okay. Actually, the next question is for Tiffany. Tiffany, you've officiated across NCAA divisions. What has your experience been? What has it been like since or as an AAPI woman in a role where visibility and authority intersect? Like you're a person who's in the limelight and you have authority on the court, and you're sometimes being challenged. What has that experience been like?
Thanks for the question. And it's funny, I do have to go into the space of what it means to be a referee or an official first, because I believe that's the service that's being provided. And again, to the coaches and to the parents that are watching, we can't have these character building moments without officials. And I can say that at the grassroots recreational level, youth sports level that are amateur right now, and not obviously at the NCAA, because it is a different kind of set space of play and competition. But there's a scarcity, and we can't play without them. We can't have games without officials, and I think it has become harder to have officials be in this space. So it's not even necessarily about my identity as an Asian American. It's about just the role that it plays in itself, and how we all are these stakeholders in youth sport development, and that we have that space in it. And I hope that we can be mindful of each other's role. You mentioned authority, and it's interesting that I saw that word, and it's funny because I do believe the cultural piece of an Asian American or an Asian identifying person does deal with a respect for authority. So I can honestly say, in that my interaction with honestly Asian coaches or Asian athletes, I feel that respect, and it's there. And I don't know if it's because they see that familiar face, or it's just within our DNA and what we feel about kind of just that respect for authority. I actually don't jive with authority. I feel like I'm an arbiter of the game. I feel like my position is to adjudicate the rules as written. And I think that that's the position that I want to be in that space. And that's all that I really want to say about like just the officiating space, and how we want to encourage people to be out there, to be a part of the experience. And it is my role as an NCAA official to continue to help those that are in the high school levels and whatnot realize, hey, your work matters. That senior that is crying after that last game, it's because that's their last game. That's their last shot at this. And you're a part of that person's experience. And I hope that you do the best job that you can, because you're human and you're fallible, but you got to give your best effort out there, because that senior is never going to forget that moment when they can't put on that uniform anymore. And so I guess that's coming from the space of just the official piece. And obviously, as just the female and Asian American, I have been to spaces where I've been the only, and I'm the one on the court, and I have been the torment of go back to where you came from comments. And it's interesting, like it's hard, and I just hope that there's just more compassion for officials, because I don't know any other profession where you can just go into someone's office and feel like you can berate them or speak to them in a way that sometimes our officials are spoken to. And like I said, it's not even about my gender or my ethnicity. It's just the role, and sometimes I have to put that. It's just the shirt. It's not who you are. It's whoever's wearing that shirt. That unfortunately has to have this level of armor, if you will. But I have encountered that, and I've also encountered just acceptance. And so I believe the professional leagues that are actually having more women and more people of color help with that, right? Because of the visibility of those that are in these like higher profile positions on the TV, whether it be at the W or the NBA. If you're seeing folks of color and you're seeing folks of different genders, that's just the visibility that's needed for larger acceptance.
Thanks, Tiffany. And and definitely for the rest of you, for the other three of you, you're also in positions of visibility and positions of authority. Um, do you have anything you want to add to that in terms of how have your positions of visibility and authority been maybe challenged or not challenged? How has that experience been? But Tiffany, I really like the point you make, how it wasn't about your gender or your ethnicity. It was just that shirt, just the fact that you're in a position of authority alone. And I've definitely seen that. I think it's one of those things where it crosses gender identity and ethnic identity. It's just authority, period. But yeah, how about for the rest of you? Any of you want to add to that? If not, I can move on. Okay, I'll go to the next question, and I'm sure that a lot of this will overlap anyways. So the next question is actually for JJ.
Yeah.
JJ, with your experience coaching in the southern region in Louisiana, how have you seen AAPI representation, or maybe its absence of representation? How have you seen that play out in your region's sports communities and sports experiences?
I mean, there's really a limited amount, and that's why I made the even comment science teacher, math teacher, etc.
Mm.
It's a limited amount, so it's really non-existent. There's a few Filipinos here that actually coach volleyball, and again, you do what you, I've always said, perfect soldier. I'm a perfect representation of who I am and what my nationality is. And you just treat people with respect to make sure they understand that. There's many people people even younger than me that will call yes, ma'am, yes, sir. You add the Miss title, the Mister title, etc. That's just part of that's a Southern feature that is also a IPI feature. So you give them that respect and you show them the worth ethic. How many times have our parents or my parents in particular, be the best as you can and do the work that you need to, by far. And so that's how I've always done it from there. And I feel that's important than anything else. You treat people the way you want to be treated. And then you take it like that. I mean, again, I come back to the same concept. So, I walk in as a young coach and somebody thinks I'm the science teacher. Years later, I walk into the same building. One referee comes, look at me, and goes, you walk in this building like you own it. I go, yeah, I am the head volleyball coach. Okay, you look like you are. Again, that's years later, same gym, but now gave that little comment about, hey, we think you're the moderator. It's 5, 6 years later, one referee's going, no, you walk in with a purpose. And that's part of it. You give respect and then you make sure that you potentially get it from that standpoint. It doesn't happen anymore. I've been at it too long. So most people know who I am down here. But you at least try to give that respect. And if you see a young one, like, hey, my name's this. How can I help you? And that's what I try to do. I think that's very important today.
JJ, that was actually really interesting what you brought up about with the young ones. So being one of the few Filipinos in your area and in this sport, especially in the southern region, what are some of the specific ways that you connect with your athletes who might not be Filipino or might not be familiar with Filipinos? I can tell you that when I lived in Illinois a long time ago,
Mhm.
uh, people would literally not know where or have heard of Filipinos. I'm of Filipino descent myself. And then I would just get a different label put on me, like, oh, so you're not African American? Like, yeah, actually my family's from the Philippines. But yeah, so how would you connect in an area where maybe not a lot of people are familiar with Filipinos?
They're not. They're not really. They think you're Vietnamese. That's the first thing. I said no, and they really don't. I think in the recent resurgence within the last 10 years, from the cultural adaptation from food, as people like food, from what you see now on YouTube, or they're able to Google something, you see the pop-up Filipino restaurants from people that you'd even think was Filipino, by far. There's one that passed a couple of years ago. There's a place called Coconut Beach. Him and I mean, he's a great guy. My kids love him. I never put two and two an effect from that he was another one. You've seen him, but then you go, when he had passed, typically the Filipino community would end up having masses for them. Nowadays, with the advent of Zoom, we end up doing it via Zoom for the 10 days. Prior, then I kind of paused. I think I've never realized I never made that connection with that man, by far. And I wish I would have now, because again, that's something that ties us together. By far, you just think of it as another, potential Pacific Islanders, but typically we're chumped in as a Vietnamese. I mean, wouldn't y'all agree by that? People don't know what it is, but I think now, again, you see the advent of Filipino food. People actually like it. Either they're YouTubing it and they're asking what it is. I would like to eat some pancit. What is that? That's a noodle based soup. Or something called dunaguan. It's a blood based soup. But it sounds, well, it's not blood, but it really sounds like a blood based soup. They don't know, but they said it looked good. They saw it on TV, or no, they saw it on YouTube. So, I mean, education, telling people what's going on by far. I mean, don't you agree?
And if I may add, because I grew up in Louisiana in the South, and it was a time period where Asian, the term Asian wasn't even present. It was I was Oriental. And to be called that and to be different, I can honestly say that it was through sports that I was able to get social acceptance. And I didn't have to culturally assimilate to my peers that were predominantly black and white women. And for me, it was just the way to honestly get in and be accepted and not seen as othered, because that's what it was at the time, and that was just the geographic region that we were in. And I, as JJ mentioned, I think that there's this nuance of food and connection, and seeing, yes, others in sport, seeing that, of course, in the WNBA, the Valkyries, we have our first Asian female head coach, and so when a young girl in the state of Mississippi, that doesn't have any other affiliation other than possibly the colleges that are there that are prominent for her, she can see that on television. And I think like that means something. Um, and for the southern region, at least when in growing up, and I feel fortunate to have kind of had both experiences and to really share out from that space. It wasn't about when you were on a team, it really wasn't about who you were. It was how you can perform. And I think like that's the beauty of sport. It was the connection of like if she could get to that pass, or if she can finish, right? Like that was the buy-in for honestly acceptance. It had nothing to do with color. And then now we understand that the notice of color, the understanding of color can just bridge us even more. Right? Like the sport is the initial connection, but yet how in depth can we go when we just hear each other's live stories?
I mean, you look at, again, the prevalence even in the NBA are exposing for the Miami Heat. He's Filipino. Nobody would have known that. You watch the TV show on HBO Max, The Pit, where they actually have Filipinos in there, using their own Tagalog dialect. You go, whoa. I think one was the stereotypical. It was a Spider-Man. We didn't know. I didn't know Grandma was Filipino until she started talking to it. Actually, on the movies, you go, whoa. I went, whoa, and you just bust out and laughed. You never had that before, and I think that's when the sequence of 10 years, as people begin to recognize that. Again, I teach high school chemistry and biology. That's standard typical math teacher, right? That's just part. But if that is the point for breaking in and then showing who we are and showing what the culture is next with that side, that's part of it. That's how I feel. Discipline and structure, kind of like what needs to happen.
Well, actually, my next question is for JJ and Marshall, for the two of you, at least to start with. And it kind of adds to what we're talking about here. As seasoned coaches, so both of you have a lot of experience as coaches. Uh, what's one piece of cultural wisdom, or family value from your AAPI heritage that you intentionally bring to your coaching style? And how has that resonated with your athletes? So, what do you bring from your culture and your cultural wisdom or your family values? How do you use that when you're coaching? And how have your athletes responded to that?
I was thinking about that visibility comment earlier too, or the progress that we've made. Um, what is it like when I first started playing? I'm gonna date myself, but people would say, "Hey, like, hey Jackie Chan, hey Bruce." Oh, actually, it started with Bruce Lee, right? So there's a phase where I was Bruce Lee for a minute, and then it was Jet Li, then there was Jackie Chan, and then when Yao Ming started playing, that was real progress. Now it's like, okay, well, he's 2 feet taller than me. I'm 5'8", he's 7'6". But that's progress. And then Jeremy Lin comes along, and then it's a stretch where like it's just Lin's, hey, Linsanity, you're next. You got next five. And so I kind of laugh at that progress a little bit. But when I reflect on my coaching journey too, like and Dr. Tran, it made me think about like the insecure adolescent kid who doesn't want to embrace their identity. So like for me, my biggest source of stress as a immigrant in my third, fourth, fifth grade years was say something in Korean. And like that's like the last thing you want to do where you want to be different when you want to assimilate, right? And it's so interesting now being a parent and intentionally stepping into my, like I think for all of us, like we want to be known as that coach who happens to be Filipino, who happens to be Japanese or Vietnamese, or happen for me, I'm an excellent coach first who happens to be Korean American. What does that mean? Now people can get to ask, and does K-pop influence my coaching? And who knows what it is, but for me, the I knew that I found comfort in my skin as a coach was when I was leading this program here in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. Lake Oswego High School is where I coached. Um, and I would intentionally bring the concept of 선배, 후배 when I was talking about classes. So 선배 in Korean means, I'm a class of such and such, class of 95 from Springfield High School. So I'm a 선배. I'm the guy who came before all the class of 96, 97, 98. And to the classes of 93, 90, 92, I'm the 후배. I came after. So there's this immediate connection. And so when I would teach my predominantly white, basketball players, these Korean words and say, "Hey, Jimmy, you're Casey's hube," and immediately, like when I'm trying to emphasize the message, I said this earlier, we're all a part of something bigger than us, and we're trying to, make proud the classes that came before us with the team, that senior class that will graduate each year. I would teach them like a simple Korean, and just that act alone, when I do have the occasional Korean kid or like an Asian American kid who is seeing an adult like embrace saying like a foreign language on a public stage, whether it's in a big camp setting or it's at a banquet, um, I think that's something that I find myself trying to do more intentionally so that again, it's the education piece of it, right? And then you go, hey, is there such a word in Vietnamese? Is there such a, do you do that in the Filipino culture? Do you do that in Africa? Like, and it's a way to open up a dialogue, you know, um, with people that you don't share a common background.
I mean, I don't integrate that. I just integrate prayer. To me, prayer, spiritual. I mean, you're talking about Pacific Islanders or that type of design. The Catholicism is there and prayer is there, a part of it. So you integrate that in the last aspect of practice from there. One of the prayers we say is the little things, and it's the little things that makes you successful. Or the other prayer is pause a moment. Pause a moment. There's no special time for prayer. I think that's important. I don't think that's cultural. I just think that's part of us, and part of who we are by far. Okay, hold on. Funny note on the Jackie Chan. Years ago, my old team, there's here in Louisiana in general, there's it's called a Spooktacular tournament. Well, my team wanted, so he dressed up whatever from the Minions, etc. My team looked at me and they came up, we got a great idea, Coach Ron. I go, what's that? And they go, we're going to dress up as a Karate Kid. We're going to dress you up as Mr. Miyagi. And in a period of time, you go, sure, no problem. You got to laugh. You laugh along, go with the kids. And literally, you do that. Now, in today's world, that's not, there's a little more thought to it. It's not just, you're going to do this. Now it's a little more thought. You just can't go ahead and throw it. But there's a great picture out or Polaroid shot from there. So, he made me laugh when he brought that up. Forgot about that one. Yep. That's part of growing up, being called all that stuff. But yeah, you always take it as I put it, terms of endearment, right? They do like you from there. I could be wrong.
Yeah, it could be used in different ways, right? Um, Tiffany, Alicia, I actually do want to open up the question to you because you two as well. You're obviously in leadership positions, you're in positions of visibility. Um, are there components of your cultural wisdom, your family values that are specifically related to your Asian American heritage, your Pacific Islander heritage. Uh, are there parts of that that you use or apply and kind of share with your students, your athletes? And if so, can you explain how it works and how they've reacted to it?
I think for me, I am a Chinese American, and I do consider myself first generation, so first to be born in the United States, so child of immigrants. Um, I think I speak to the privilege piece a lot in the fact that I get to, right? And just the simple wording of I don't have to. I don't have to play basketball. I don't have to do this, but I get to. And I feel that it comes from a place of gratitude and understanding that I'm of able-bodied, right? That I can be in this space because I'm able-bodied to play. Um, I would say that from different generations, right? And what I believe is just like my Chinese lineage. I think all of our experiences are kind of woven into our DNA and what has been hereditary within us. As an advocate for just youth sports in general, and it's not even my wheelhouse, if you will, but there's obviously a stigma with swimming and water, right? For folks of color, not only in just like the Asian kind of community, but also in our Black and Brown communities. And I think for me, it's understanding that fear can be our blockage to so many things. And I think that I don't want to come from a place of scarcity. I also don't want to come from a place of less than. And I want that our young athletes of Asian identity to understand that this is a get to, this is a joy. It's finding the joy in play and to just go out there and just be in your space. And then, yes, as they get older, they're going to define like what is for them, right? And what isn't. And as they get to the high school level with Coach Cho and Coach Juan, and just being like, okay, is this for me, right? Am I wanting to compete? Because play and competition, like they can go hand in hand. But yet, yes, as you get older, there are these levels of competition that take more focus, that take more time, that take more desire. And do you want that? And if you do want that, how can we support you with that? So I think it's a culture of support that I want to claim just as a Chinese American. Like I know that my parents supported everything that I did, everything that I chose to do that was healthy for me and as a young adolescent, they supported me in the ways that they could. And I think that that's the message to go about. And that it's not the work, it's the joy and play. And when you find that joy and play, then the longevity is there. Right. And the end goal isn't the college scholarship. The end goal isn't, where can I play after the next? How about live in the present and be in that moment, enjoy your teammates, enjoy the ones that came before you, honor the ones that came before you in the program and be the model for the ones that are coming behind you. And I think that's what Coach Cho's message was. I'd be all about that. I'm ready to go for him and play for him because I align with that, right? And just my own cultural identity. So that's what I do hope for with the students that I interact with and the athletes that I interact with is to understand that fear is just courage waiting for you to accept it. And that if you want something, find the joy in it first, and that you'll have the support with your family. And your family can be your team, it could be your chosen family, and of course, it could be your biological family.
And I think for me, I think a lot about my values around family and community as well. And I think that I bring that when I talk to athletes. And I think of sports as a community, and whether it's the community that's sitting in the stands or the community out there on the field, and the idea of connection and family. I think that we don't operate in isolation. And even if we're individual sport participant, we carry people with us. And so there's a lot of honor that comes with that and a lot of um, pressure too sometimes. But hopefully it also means that there's a lot of support and there are going to be a lot of people who are rooting you on and will also be rooting you on if you don't win. And so for me, I think that emphasizing, we're part of a community, we're part of a team. That's a really big thing for young people who are coming into this identity as a competitive person and trying to do their best is to also keep them grounded and rooted and understand though that you're part of a group too. So you are trying to exceed, you're trying to excel, you're trying to be the best you can be as an individual, but we respect our team, we respect the officials, and we understand that this is a part of it. A community. Sportsmanship is really important. The respect for authority, respect for the people who came before us. And some of it, I think, I'm thinking earlier, JP, you turned the question to us, and I was hesitant to speak because I think some of what a lot of us are saying here is that we have had to work so hard. We've had to put up with comments that were disrespectful and didn't immediately respect us out the door, being Asian and in these sports spaces where people didn't expect us to be. That's a big burden, but my hope is, and the reason why I partly keep doing it is that so they can't deny it. They can't deny us. They can't deny that we're great. And then for my kids, hopefully they just walk in and they get the respect that they can just walk in. Whereas before I had to, do this or that and showcase and um, really show my stuff that I knew what I was talking about when it came to sport and especially sport and mental health. But hopefully the next person gets to walk in and they can have the last name Tran or Lee or whatever, and they'll just automatically still get the respect. And that's part of the honor of participating in sport.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Just, anytime I'm in a panel like this and I have somebody who's like a mental health specialist, I'm always like, I'm on my screen, I'm next to you, Dr. Tran, and I'm like, am I really okay? Like I, because in order to lead that, you said you touched on something like the burden, right? And when I look back, when I started 20 years ago, my role models, there was like two Asian American basketball coaches that I knew of. Harvey Katani down in Fairfax, who's a legend. And he's of a different era. And then, yeah, like Eric Spoelstra, I don't know if you know this coach, JJ, like he's from
Mhm,
Oregon. I actually have a relationship with him, right? Because he's
mhm,
somebody we're
mhm.
in the city and, with text and things like that.
Is he a natural Filipino or it's half?
He's half Filipino, his mother
Okay.
is, right?
Mhm.
By the way, that's a whole nother conversation about who's half and who's full, and right?
Okay.
Like he's a proud Filipino coach, right? But like for you, Dr. Tran, like what? Because I think I paid the price. I think there was a lot of burden and stress. Like I knew that at Lake Oswego, I was one of the first like Asian Americans to have a high profile coaching job at a Nike high school. So there were my first 2 years when we were winning, like I was stressed, and but also like there were certain times when I felt like I needed to step away, but I couldn't because I knew that if I didn't excel, if I wasn't exceptional, like the next Asian coach who an AD might consider might have a harder time. So in that sense, like me sticking it out, my wife and kids paying the price for that sacrifice, for that excellence, like there was a cost associated to it, right? Like how do we make sense of all that? Like, or whether like, Tiffany, you're saying like your parents, I mean, what is it, first gen, right? Like I'm 1.5, 1.25. The years keep, going away from me as I get older. But like, we did like we get to have the privilege of piggybacking off the sacrifice of those who came before us, right? Like I do want the coaches after me to not have it as hard, right? But what are the costs associated with that? And like, how do we stay in the game, without putting so much burden on us to be excellent all the time?
Yeah, Marsha, I love that you just put that out there. Right? And I think that is it, is that we don't hide this. And one of the things, if you were to ask me about my research, the one of the narratives I want to get away from with sport is that um, it's all one thing or the other. Like I
Mm.
really want to emphasize if I could do anything with my research, it's dualism and complexity, and that we can be strong and we can be powerful and excel physically and athletically, and we can be vulnerable and
Mm.
need help and struggle. And that's what I want us to be honest about, because it is very unlikely, it is very rare you can get all one and not the other, like you're putting out there. And that is such an important reality. I love that you're being honest about it. Let's all be honest about it. It puts a lot of burden on us. And that's why I was hesitant to speak up right away. Um, you know, what's helping me is I'm in this very safe panel of people who I can tell, yes, they understand, they've gone through it too. And so thanks so much for putting that out for all the people who might be listening or might listen down the line. We'll know, like, Coach Cho, wow, what a record. How excellent is Coach Cho? And how hard was it for him and
Mm.
his family and what he had to struggle through, that it could be both things. And so that's a huge, huge thing to get across to people. And with my work, I really try to emphasize it's not just black and white, and it's not just like they're good or they're not good. They win or they lose. It's that, they can win and they can still have a hard time. They can be so powerful, so awesome, so excellent, and still have problems and still have needs. That is humanness. So great what you said.
And I would add, like, there's just this spectrum, right? There's this spectrum of what it means to be. And yes, we have to, just like the way that we are the examples for our community when we're in a game, right? And the way that we act on the sidelines shows our kids how we should be and our character and our integrity. It shows the audience, the spectators, if we're arguing a call and whatnot, and we're doing it in a boisterous in way that's kind of not in the flow of the game or doesn't fit, what are our parents going to see in that kind of example that we're setting? And I think, like, that's the example that I would assume you need to set for these young men, that you need to say that, yeah, you know what, this is hard for me sometimes. Right? This is hard to be in this space and have these expectations. So I know what it feels like when I'm on you to kind of rise above. And we have to, I guess, feel that space of compassion with each other. And know that, like, that's the I guess the crutch of mental health, right? You can see when you have a sprained ankle, you could possibly see swollenness. There's a tangible piece, but you can't always see when someone is struggling with um, with their expectations, with their pressures, with possibly their performance. We can't always see that, and young people are really good at hiding what is it that they're really feeling. They are, and they're good at masking it. They're good at, like, I don't know if this is the most popular term from a young teenage person. It's fine. Like, how you doing? Fine, right? And those are the connecting pieces that I hope that the folks that are watching is just to let young people see your vulnerability. Young people see that, we don't always have to be these superheroes for them. And it's hard not to be, right? Because I feel that my parents were my superheroes, and I see them in a way that I'm like, wow, you're also still human. You had to do the best that you can do to survive, to eat. And I think, like, the best that I can do for my kid is to say, yeah, your grandparents went through this, so I can do this for you. And that is always going to be the lineage of Asian Americans, I believe, is just what our legacy for our children. And I don't know if we do them a service if we don't show them our vulnerability.
Tiffany, I'm glad you brought up our roles, all of us as adults, our roles as models, and showing what is possible, that we can be strong and at the same time be vulnerable. And Alicia, you were talking about the duality. But so as models, it actually leads straight to my next question for Marshall. And again, for everyone else too, but I want to start with Marshall. Marshall, you've mentored athletes through youth programs as well as elite programs, which I think we've established that elite programs can be a little bit different from the youth program. But you've mentored both. How do you guide young players in navigating cultural identity and belonging in competitive environments? So maintaining our cultural identity while in these intense cultural environments.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't know. I've been the head coach for the Nike Hoop Summit World Team for the last 2 years. So just for some context for the viewers, that's an all-star game at the end of the high school basketball season, and it's sandwiched in between the McDonald's All-American game and the Jordan Brand Classic. I mean, it's about as prestigious as it gets. So what was really interesting this past April. I coached players from Eastern Europe, so Montenegro, Serbia. So they're coming with their own edge, and they're already professional players. They played against, grown men all throughout. I coached Carmelo Anthony's kid, Kyan Anthony, who was representing Puerto Rico for the first time, even though he's really a New York, Baltimore kid. Taj Ariza, whose mother is half Japanese, so he's quarter Japanese. And so he's wearing Japan on his chest for the first time in this competition, and so on and so forth. Um, what was really interesting for me was I got to, right, coach them in terms of like how I treated them was really no different than the youth teams that I coached. At the end of the day, like if I can separate that, like if I see them first as where they're coming from and on the biggest stage, um, like walking that tightrope of you're representing a whole country and having all that pressure, but also you're at the end of the day, you're just a kid trying to get playing time from Coach Cho, which again, this is the one place that's not an all-star game. There were guys who didn't play a lot, and now they had to deal with the repercussions of it. Um, I think the biggest thing for me um, as a leader is being okay to say and taking on that burden. This is why Dr. Tran, I was asking, like, am I okay? Because the burden of a head coach is so great. So what I found myself saying to them after we lost in overtime, we were so close, was players win games, coaches lose games. So guys, this one's on me, right? So I think as adults, I think, and this is again, I'm hoping there's a lot of coaches in the in the audience. Like, if we can't say that out loud as leaders, I don't. I think it's, not taking away the sting of the loss or the responsibility or the pressure, but especially for the elite guys. Like, guys, this is on me. Like, I wish I was better, but this is the reality, and this is just one like snippet of many games that these elite players are going to have. But I'll take that one, right? And then as a coach, you just hope that like, and I again, the whole journey versus destination thing. This game we had 10 practices. And so that's 10, let's say 2 hours. That's 20 hours to positively impact these future millionaires, future NBA players, future national team players. And for me, I always take comfort in that, you know, we won those practices. We poured into them. We allowed them to look good in front of all the NBA scouts who are watching. And the game happens to be one moment, but there's other you can hedge against that because you're winning practices and you're having positive impact in different ways.
Great. Thank you, Coach. And actually, in the interest of time, I am going to move on to the next question. I realize we've been having these great discussions, and we're it's been a while. Okay, so the next question actually is for Alicia. So, Alicia, how does your research at the Tempe Lab help us to understand? So, us who are here in the webinar, and other people who read your work, how does your research at the Tempe Lab help us understand how AAPI athletes negotiate our identities in spaces that may not affirm our backgrounds.
Yeah, and I mentioned some of this, that duality and the complexity is really a big component of my research. And this mirrors very much the Asian American community, the diversity that's there, the heterogeneity, the complexity and richness of our cultures. And so, for instance, some people will thrive academically and they will actually fit the model minority stereotype mold. Some people will struggle with it. And so when I get asked this question a lot, I have to say, I have to be honest, there's no one size fits all answer here. And so some of what my research is finding and so what I have to break to people is it's good news and it's bad news. There are some things that suggest that maybe athletes aren't doing well in these spaces where they're not affirmed. So we see things like higher alcohol and substance use among AAPI college student athletes relative to AAPI non-athlete college students. We see that for both groups, discrimination is linked to poor mental health. It doesn't completely sports doesn't completely offset the risk there. It's what we would expect. But there's also hope for positive coping. So in general, sport appears to be a positive thing for mental health for Asian Americans. I think we still need to keep a tab on the research there and make sure that that's the case, because sport can also invite things like taunting and stress and pressure too. It's kind of like what JP had said earlier, sport has to be done right. And so, that space has to be right. And then also things like exercise and being physically active appear to be helpful for mental health. And so those are some great ways for AAPI athletes to cope with being in these hard places. And I think it's a lot of like what Marshall or Coach Cho is talking about, is that duality there, and that some of it is inviting that space for coping too for young people and developing athletes, things like that.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. And actually, my next question is somewhat related, but tangentially, but it's for Tiffany. Tiffany, as an athletic director and a mom, um, how do you foster inclusive sports environments for young athletes? How do you create that culture, that environment, especially for those people who are entering a system that wasn't necessarily built for them? Right? Like we have these athletes coming in where maybe these kids weren't in mind when these environments were created. And here you are as an athletic director and a mom. How do you create this space for them?
For me, because I've worn all of these different hats, and I've seen different levels of play and whatnot, and I have to kind of put on the hat of the entering elementary years. So kind of know that that's the age group that I'm kind of referring to here, and not a high school level or a college level athlete here. Children have a right to play. Just like, in my opinion, they have a right to do all these other things. And I get that there are these systems in different states where it has become more exclusive just based on your skill level or whatnot. And I can honestly say that, why are we taking away the right to play for some of these children that are like 8, 9, 10 years old? And for me, you don't know their bodies, their mindsets, just where they are, and their mental maturation all varies. And to say that it's too late for an eighth grade girl to try high school sports, like that to me is a very hard thing to say to any child, that it's too late. Like, how can we do that as educators, as parents, as coaches, and as administrators? And for me, I want to be aligned with programs that have just the ability of and yes, there's accessibility, right? There are some folks that are in spaces where it costs financially so much to be a part of these opportunities. And if anything, I would hope that that wouldn't be the case. Accessibility is hard, and it's not only just with like the cost of it, it's transportation. We have working families. How can they get to practices and whatnot? And so it's a heavier question, JP, but I hope that the youth sports world doesn't get to a space where we take away this right to play. As I mentioned to like anyone that I talk to, it's like, in my opinion, there are two things that kids have to have: food and the ability to just play, and that should just be their birthright. And for them to be active in that space, yes, education's a big piece of that. But how are we taking away the ability to play on a team, to be a part of something bigger themselves, and to give them training? From an AAPI perspective, I really feel that it's coaches' education first, especially if I'm the athletic director, right? So we have coaches that come in and we want to assure that their lived experiences are not their only. Their lived experiences are super important, right? Like just the coaches that are on this panel, they have great lived experiences. And what are we doing to broaden in their experience? Meaning expose them to, yes, what does it mean to have one of your athletes be identified as Black or African American? What does it mean to have them, and how do we service them, right? In the same way of like, how do we service a young woman versus a young man biologically in that space? And I would say it's the education to know that the affordability in the sense of having a child thrive in an athletic environment is, as Dr. Tran said from the get-go, it's about the caring adult that's there, the caring adults that shape that opportunity and that environment. So it's kind of educating them first on Asian American culture, Black culture, Hispanic culture, Latino culture. It's all of those elements to say, okay, why is it that that player may not be connecting with you? And how can you, as the caring adult, connect with them first? How can you meet them where they are and then get them to rise to their capability? And so for me as the athletic director, I want to assure that our coaches have that skill set to connect. What is it that I can do for your training that's beyond CPR, AED, mandatory kind of like child abuse? Like, what can we do from your professional development that says, hey, how do we see athletes in a way that's beyond their skill set and their performance? How can they say, yeah, I want to talk to Coach Cho because I'm having a hard time balancing my academics and trying to get to practice. My executive functioning skills aren't there yet. How can I reach out to someone that can help me with this? Because I want to give him my all at practice, but yet I got an AP exam that I got to study for. Right. And I think that if I can do that for my coaches, that will only help the athletes, which hopefully in turn just helps the overall landscape.
So actually, my next question is actually directly related to that, which you just described. And this is for JJ and Tiffany specifically. If you could design one change in youth sports systems to better support AAPI athletes, what would it be? And why would you make that change?
Wow, that's a good one. Never really thought. For volleyball, there's just not a big population of AAPI type kids here in this area. I mean, I would assume California they would be.
I would say that that's the case, and it's just the region, and I think that's where it becomes hard, right? Because if you are the only, you're in a different space when there's more of a collective. When I moved out to California for grad school and I heard that there were Asian basketball leagues, I was like, there is no way. What do you mean Asian basketball leagues? Like I could just be Asian and play? Like that's amazing. You mean I don't have to like outrun some kid? I don't have to, and so I think you asked for only one, JP, and I have like a whole bunch of them. But I think as I alluded to before, it's the adults, right? So it's the coaches that are in place that see these young people come in, and what biases, implicit or known, that they have of an Asian athlete? Like what are they coming with already? And so I think it's about kind of educating the coaches, the adults in the room, because the kids have no agency. They could just show up and play. That's all they want to do is just show up and play and possibly hustle and work hard and just be molded. And I think it's the adults that sees, oh, okay, just sees their skill and sees what they can work on and positively encourages them that hey, wow, your skill set is you are quick. You can see that play and you can get there. And hey, we got to work on this. We got to work on that ball handling too. We got to be able to see the open player when they're open, right? And deliver them that pass. So I think it's about Coach Edge's education and it's about opportunities. And I hope that there's accessibility in mind. I don't know the true history of California and how the Asian leagues came about, but I can honestly say that it was probably a community of Japanese identifying folks, Chinese identifying folks that got turned away, that got cut or didn't have the means to do it because they are in spaces where parents couldn't bring them or they didn't have the affordability to be there. And then there was that community of folks that says, nope, you know what? You do have to be Asian identifying in this space, and that we are going to make sure that we provide these opportunities for you to play. And as JJ kind of mentioned, it's based on numbers, but when you are that only, as I was that only, I hope they didn't kind of typecast me or see me as anything based on their implicit biases or whatnot. I hope they just saw me as a young person just wanting to play, having a joy for it. And, it's the same thing. It's like, well, what if a kid's not aggressive? Can you teach a kid to be aggressive? Yeah, I think you can. It's hard, but you can. And that's like a duality of sports. It's like if they're not aggressive, then maybe they're underperforming. No, they're processing. They're trying to figure things out, you know. So I would hope that it is just seeing the child and seeing what is it that they can do and not bring their own stories and mask them before they allow someone to just present themselves.
I'm only coach one in college and then 0 in high school. That's Asian, Pacific Islander Asian in Louisiana. Now, you see them more doing violin. I mean, there's AAU violin going down, if you didn't know that. In there, because they have brackets, but it's almost the same thing. Sorry. It's for true. I one day looked at a bracket, my own child, and it's like, oh, that looks like AAU violin to me. And it was.
Great. Thanks. By the way, everyone, we have about 10 more minutes. So I'm going to, I have about a couple more questions to ask, and then we'll wrap up. So my next question's for Dr. Tran. So Alicia, you've presented to national bodies like the NCAA, Adidas. How can institutions better support, like the NCAA and Adidas, how can those institutions and others better support AAPI athletes beyond surface level representation?
Yeah, it's such an important question. I get this question a lot. For AAPI specifically, I would say stop hate, celebrate, and make them great. So when I say stop hate, there's a reality in sports, and we've been talking a little bit about it. Whether it's in the locker room or on the field, sports, one of those places where jokes get made, the stereotypes get played out, the racist bullying and taunting happens. And so as an organization, you need to recognize this reality and be prepared to set the tone. So if your response is tepid, that's what these athletes, their families, the AAPI community, everybody will hear. But if you come out loud and strong and clear against AAPI hate, no matter what the backlash, no one's going to get a mixed message. And then for Celebrate, we're partly here because there's more diversity in sport. There's more representation in sport. And so that's great. Put them in front. and celebrate that. Don't let them blend in. It's not about making them look like the other athletes. It used to be that baseball players were selected because they looked like a baseball player, and that is not the case anymore. We've evolved since then. And I think so, for instance, my son, who's half Asian, I think my half Asian multiracial son looks like a baseball player. And so there are a lot of anti-Asian stereotypes or beliefs that Asian Americans don't belong in sports. And it's still actually the case that AAPI athletes are still a statistical or quantitative minority. But what this means is that a lot of AAPI athletes and coaches and officials and other stakeholders in sports, who are out there now, are groundbreakers, and they're one of the few in their leagues or the teams or whatnot. And so let's celebrate this. And so that can be things like the Arizona Diamondbacks have Korean, Chinese, Japanese, and Filipino heritage celebrations this month. We're not all the D-backs, I get that, but one thing we can do is invite AAPI families to teach us how they understand, how they support, how they celebrate their athletes' sports participation. Leverage it so the athletes can have something to be proud of. Be genuine with it. So if you had like a party or a potluck, and you had told my mom when she was still alive that you liked her Vietnamese egg rolls, she would be bringing you those egg rolls when she saw you next. So you better be genuine when you say like, oh, I like Vietnamese food, things like that. Mean it, and then celebrate it and give pride to that whole community, yourself, your team, everyone, and then, for making them great. This is what you already do, coaches: the patience, the caring, the potential that you see in athletes that they don't necessarily see in themselves. Those are really good things. And we can add to that understanding these players by understanding the communities that are behind them. And so we know now we're talking about the pressure that sometimes is there for them to succeed both academically and athletically. We can imagine what that must be like, the stress that comes with it, the risk for burnout. And so we can emphasize something that we've talked about is keep it fun, keep the love of sport going, and keep it a part of who they are. So for instance, I have a lot of great motivational quotes from Vince Lombardi, Michael Jordan, but you know what? Shohei Ohtani has a lot of great quotes that he said. Naomi Osaka has said a lot of great quotes. Jeremy Lin, the list goes on. And so there are some great Asian American figures. You take your pick. We mentioned Bruce Lee earlier. Great quotes there that motivate, and also just be like, hey, you know what? Shohei Ohtani, #1 selling jersey from the MLB. I love it. I see all these people walking around with Ohtani on their back. Love it. And that's a fantastic place to be. And let's celebrate that, and let's show that to our athletes, and let that help them make them great. And also, hopefully that'll stop some of the hate too, and make this more of a space that is for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders.
I really like how you brought up I was making note here about how celebrating and making them great, it's related to not looking like an athlete. I think many of us can understand the idea of the eye test. I've always struggled with the eye test when coaches and athletes talk about the eye test. Like, this person doesn't pass the eye test. And I always thought, so you're using your prejudice to tell me that this person can play or not play. I couldn't grasp that idea. But I also understand there's deeper concepts behind the eye test. But I've also heard it used in that way. And I love that you're using the celebrate and make great as a way to kind of counter the eye test. Like, not all baseball players look like such and such. They're going to look different. One of my favorite players plays for the Cleveland Guardians, Stephen Kwan, who I think is from the Bay Area, but he's awesome. He's like great hitter, right? Great player. So, but I don't think a lot of people would know that. So I want to move on to the next question. Thank you. And again, it is linked. It's related here, and this is for Tiffany. So I just asked Alicia about her work with, Adidas and the NCAA. Tiffany, you've held roles in almost every corner of sports, from sales to coaching. Where have you seen the most progress in AAPI inclusion? And where's the progress still lagging?
I feel that like that question, it is just based on my just purview and vision, and it's based on honestly the region of California. And I can honestly say that the state of California is very different than other parts of just the overall United States. Um, I think that from the other panelists, we can always see, right? So because we come from the space where we were the only, we automatically see when we see another Asian face in the sporting professional industry, whether it be the coaches, whether it be the referees, we see them. And then from a commerce standpoint, you know, I I have not yet seen kind of those sporting professionals. We've seen obviously doctors in the medical profession be these doctors for these professional teams and trainers and whatnot. So we've kind of landed in that space. But I have not, right, seen anyone in a head office managing a team that's of Asian identity, and it's interesting because when I first started as a young person, I thought I was going to be the Connie Chung of sports. Connie Chung was the only, right, Asian newscaster, and there wasn't a sportscaster yet of Asian identity. And y'all can please correct me if I'm wrong because I would love to know. In the sporting world, we haven't seen them on TV in that space. And I think because TV and social media are just out there for folks, I would love to see more Asian faces in that space, because the more broadcasting that we can do, the more calls that they can make. That tells you, like, if Jeremy Lin actually got on a call, right, in the sense of calling an NBA game, like that's beneficial, even though he had his Linsanity years and whatnot. Like, to be calling a game and to be doing that lends to a different level of expertise than playing the game or coaching the game. And I think like that is another vision in which we need to see some AAPI folks in those realms. Um, but I think, for the most part, we are just kind of trickling our way in. And I want young folks and I want parents to just say, hey, as much as you love sport, you don't need to be the person that's on the court, that's on the field. I love like kind of working with high school students and saying, like, listen, there is nothing wrong. And again, there's that social dynamic, but there's nothing wrong with you being the person that's the social media content editor for your school's athletic teams. There's nothing wrong with you doing the statistical data for your school's athletic teams. You're being a part of a team of pursuing your passion in sports in a different way that can provide you just a love for the game in a different concept. And so I do, and I also tell young people, I was like, go out and officiate some games. It's an easy way to earn a couple extra dollars and to understand the game in a different perspective, right? And to gain some communication skills and to gain some empathy towards those that are other, facets of this world. It's not just coaching. You don't have to be like this kind of coach. You can do all these other things. I just want the adults to expose them to that, because I don't think they know. I don't think they know that they can have opportunities in sport that are beyond the athlete and beyond the coach.
Yeah, Tiffany, I can tell you that what I'm doing now here with Positive Coaching Alliance is a great example of what you're describing. I knew at a young age that I probably wasn't going to try to go pro in sports. I knew that I loved sports and that I could potentially be a coach or something else. But basically, as life unfolded, I ended up here, and I would love to tell any young person who's thinking about a career in sports that, yeah, just like you're saying, there's more than just being on the court, on the field, in the pool, on the track. There are lots of ways, and that's kind of the beauty of the growth of the industry of sports, that it's opening up pathways and doors for others who have other skills. I was always okay at school. I was better at school than I was on the field, so I figured I'd leverage that. One other thing I want to touch on really quick, Tiffany, is you brought up how broadcasters can really We want to see other broadcasters have AAPI voices and faces on there. You know what I think is a great model of that is hearing women and seeing women doing Major League Baseball. I was so surprised when I first heard and saw women doing Major League Baseball broadcasts. I loved it. And I really think it must connect with a lot of millions of women and men out there who see this door open for, wow, there's more than just an older white male for in Major League Baseball. And I think we can pattern that. We can take that as a model with women in broadcasting. Take that as a model for the AAPI community. Thanks, Tiffany. All right, so I have two more questions. My next one's for Marshall and Tiffany again. But again, this is for everyone, and you all can again chime in as you like. In your view, Marshall and Tiffany, what can coaches do to ensure AAPI athletes are not only included, but fully seen and supported in their sports journeys? And I think this relates to what Alicia brought up in terms of celebrating and making great. But yeah, so Marshall and Tiffany, what can coaches do to ensure that AAPI athletes are not just included, but they're seen and supported in their athletic journey?
I don't know if this is relevant, but how do I put this? I, I one of the first questions was about, my experience coaching in Africa, for example, right? Um, Last year I had a player from South Sudan. His name is Kaman Malawach, and um, he he was a refugee from South Sudan, had gone to Uganda, and had then gone to Senegal to train with the NBA Academy, and then this past year played at Duke, was going to be a lottery pick. And I just think about this being seen part. I know this is an API themed conversation, but um, for me, like I had all the players. There was a group of youth players who came to watch our practice, and I got a chance to introduce a team to them. And I knew that Kaman was a strong leader, and I asked him, "Hey, would you speak to this group in Dinka, your native tongue? So not in your colonial language of English that the Sudanese have to speak in Uganda and that region, but would you speak in Dinka?" And social media obviously captured and was on. And I remember doing that intentionally because I wanted to share like somebody like I don't know how many people speak Dinka in the world, but the select few, the small percentage that do, they're gonna feel seen. Like there's no other stage where they're gonna be able to hear their native tongue being spoken on a big stage. Um, and I only share that because I think like this whole conversation, I wanted to kind of maybe I'm trying not to answer that question, but to bring it back to like because we can easily fall into like us, we're so repressed, we're so, we're the underdogs, we're not this, we're not that. And I think when you're asking me that question, I think it starts with us first to have the sensibility to like empowering another ethnic group that might be marginalized or not seen. And I think to me, when I look back on that, like what I can model the best as an Asian American coach, and for the Asian American athletes who look up to me to see is that not only am I taking care of my backyard, but that the adversity that I dealt with, I'm gonna now be a bridge builder for another like marginalized or like unheard group. And I remember doing that and thinking like this, I touched on earlier, like the game is such a pressure cooker. And by the way, Kamal Malawach did not play well on that stage. But I remember for me, the win was that I got him to speak in his native tongue to an audience. And I already won the game before the game had started, if that makes sense. And so when I'm thinking about that question, like what would it look like if I ever got a chance to you know, again, because we're not a monolithic, group, like the really unknown, like Asian group that's like not seen in the back. There's been a Korean basketball player in college. There's been a Japanese. There's been, but like, what about the rest of us in our group, like, and how do we have the sensitivity to like ask them those, ask them to speak up, and then again, like we said, celebrate that, right? To bring that to forefront. So um, I think modeling that is really powerful, other than just me intentionally looking for the very few that's in my group. If that makes sense.
I like what Coach Cho said about just allies, right? We all need allies in these spaces. And, you know, we're put in these positions where we are considered the othered, or we're considered possibly, it's hard for me to say the word minority anymore because I don't believe we are in the minority, but I understand that that's the term that we use. And we might be kind of the lower, lesser participatory in sports. Um, and, to go specific in the sense of how do we have these young athletes feel seen? For me, if I'm a white identifying coach and I have an Asian player on my team, and obviously I sense the Asian identification just based on what I see with my eyes, right? If I'm that coach, first off, it's just about connection, and it's just about like, hey, where's your family from? you know and then maybe they could tell you, and then that's just it's a conversation, and it's as simple as that. And that young person's going to go home and be like, wow, coach actually asked me where my family's from, right? And he or she actually cared to know, hey, yeah, what do we eat, what are we doing, and he just, and it's so funny because it's simply being human. And I think like that's how someone feels seen, is just getting to know people in a way where someone can express their story. And I think sometimes we have blockages because we're afraid to say the wrong thing, or we are wanting, or we're, have a wall of trying to, not offend anyone. And that's where the allies come in, right? The allies can help you, guide you in having those conversations where you're just kind of not being mute because you don't want to say the wrong thing. And in my opinion, when someone's trying to connect, like I have to come at it with a way of connection and not come at it with a way of like, oh, you're being offensive or whatnot. Like any opportunity to connect is humanity. And I think that's where we need to lean to when it comes not only to our AAPI youth, it's in just all genres. Is just having the simple conversation of getting to know the people that are on your team and getting to know all of your athletes and having them get to know each other. And honestly, if you want to talk about the athletic directorship, that's how we build culture. That's how we build an athletics philosophy and a culture of the institution in which we represent. And athletic directors can do a good job of understanding that culture, identifying that culture by listening to what the community wants, not only the parents, but the teachers, the administration, the coaches, and having us all identify with like, this is our culture in athletics. And the only way that we get to do that is when the kids have conversations, when everyone has conversations to come together.
Great. Thanks, Tiffany. All right. So we have like a minute or two left. I have one last question, and you only have to share a word or two. In a word or two, what is one concrete step that each of us can take, whether it's coaches, parents, athletes, leaders? What is one concrete step that all of us can make take to make sports more inclusive and affirming for the AAPI community? So you're putting on your consultant hat right now. If you were consulting coaches, athletes, parents, leaders, administrators, what would be your consultation in terms of making sports more inclusive and affirming for AAPI community? And you can just give it in a word or two or sentence.
Turn the comments off for social media. Don't give hate space, and promote their brand, control the narrative that way, promote their image.
Just be accepting, be a positive accepting. I mean, because again, as you know, there's a lot of hate going out there, no matter what it is. And so what we see in today's news, but being accepting of what's going on and understanding.
Your mark.
Self-reflection. I would say self-reflection, looking at yourself in the mirror and understanding like, what is it that I don't want to see? And what is it that I do want to see? And the role that we play in youth sports.
I would say stay curious. Like, you know, j- like what's that Ted Lasso thing, right? The quote, the comment he did, like basically less judgment. Judgment, I think, is pretty prevalent when you're coming from like an Asian culture, whether it's self-reflect, inflicted or, all that. But I think for me, yeah, stay curious and ask questions.
Great. Uh, Thank you. And I made sure I noted all of that because these are important. So we've run out of time, but I do again want to thank our impressive panel. Alicia, JJ, Tiffany, Marshall, thank you so much. You've shown us that inclusion and representation matter. These are not trivial things, that it is important on so many levels. For the rest of you who are still here, if you want to help, you can help by coaching, by getting involved in sports and athletics, whether it's as a volunteer or as a paid coach or official, however it is you're involved. But you can get involved in that way. And then thank you again for connecting. And if you do want to stay involved with us at PCA, you can connect with us online and through all your socials. Just search Positive Coaching Alliance. And thank you again, everyone. And I hope you all find more success in the future. And we'll talk again soon. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.